All right. A professor of digital storytelling at the University of Missouri, Joseph Erb joins us this morning to speak about the relationship between storytelling practices and community. In fact, it's precisely because of an aesthetic of engagement in his work that I've been screening Joseph's animations for students and at other events for almost a decade now. His animations speak to the lived experiences of indigenous communities and indigenous students in a storytelling medium that invites others in to both witness and to engage with the concerns, the political struggles, the stories and histories of those communities. So as a Cherokee animator, Professor Erb's work exists at the border of digital storytelling and culturally situated aesthetics, a kind of oral storytelling practice with really a long transmedia history. Rather than merely adapt traditional oral stories to cinema or to digital video, Erb composes his animations with an indigenous transmedia poetics that expresses the importance of oral and visual storytelling and language to community, history, and knowledge-making practices. Alongside his creative work with which I'm most familiar, Erb has spent years working as an educator and advocate of the Cherokee Nation in their animation and language programs, where he collaborated with technology companies to integrate Cherokee language into digital platforms. So these speak to a deeper engagement that goes beyond the art itself, not merely telling the story in digital animation, but integrating indigenous values and knowledge into all stages of the wider media project. Joseph has lived that engagement as a mentor to other animators and using his talents in service of both language revitalization and environmental resistance movements and everything in between. In many ways, we are at a time in which indigenous animation has never been more active, more relevant, and more recognized in the mainstream media and just sort of popularly in America. And really, Joseph Erb is almost single-handedly to blame for that, right? Getting that started over the past decade. So from his animated shorts in support of various movements, like We Pray in Water in 2012, to his visual retelling of the Cherokee story Sun and the Great Frog from this year's eclipse, if any of you saw going around the Twitter sphere, Erb's work places his community in the center. So I was honored to meet Joseph a few years ago at a conference panel for which I happened to be presenting his work, and then over was full on spring. And I can confirm in person and also tell us his story. We're honored to have him here today to speak with us for our Digital Humanities Forum with the talk titled Community Strength and Storytelling. Please join me in welcoming Professor Joseph Erb.
I took an animation class, and it was really kind of transformative, where my entire life I wanted to get away. And you know, part of it is going to school. You go to college, you're going to get away, you're going to decide your own destiny. And for some reason, this led me home. And I didn't want to go anywhere but home after I made this. And so I moved home. And this is back in the VHS days. I had a friend post this online the other day. This video was given out to every second grader in Cherokee Nation in the 14-county area, Cherokee and non-Cherokee. And the other day it was at a garage sale for 25 cents, so I think I'm at the bargain bin stage in this part, but this is the day when I turned it in. This was a council member and one of the voices on my thing. They both were Cherokee speakers. So I moved on to getting a grant. You know, a lot of times I do a lot of work and I get a lot of accolades, but I really do it with a lot of support. And one of the supporters I've had was my sister was an epidemiologist in tribal health clinics across Cherokee Nation, and I told her I wanted to do this animation, and I wanted to come home and teach. And she found a nonprofit there in Tahlequah that would write a grant for me and work with me to put in a grant to start teaching children. And this is one of the first pieces we did, and it actually showed in 9 different countries at the time, which was huge. We flew them out to Taos, New Mexico. Most of the children hadn't even been to Tulsa, so they had never seen buildings over 2 stories at the time. And so when we went out there, it was an amazing trip for all of us. We showed them our film. But I would say this is, my boss at the time oversold it. I thought I would be going teaching computer animation to high school students. I'd have a lot of time with them. They told me that a week before I started, they said, well, you can only buy 1 computer, and you're teaching 9 and 10-year-olds. And I was used to teaching at an Ivy League school. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to teach animations like this? So I had to like revamp what I was doing. And it turned out fantastic. And I won't show all of this stuff, but we'd work in closets and all in the school systems. We'd make armatures, and I know we have short on time, but these kids are adults now. Many of them have several children and made other animations as well. I worked in Creek and Cherokee schools across Cherokee Nation and Creek Nation through grant programs. And as I said, I'll skip over some of this stuff. So I also made superhero shows where all the good guys speak Cherokee and the bad guys speak English, which is somewhat poetic. What I wanted to do is we were trying to convince people that the language mattered, and it wasn't the language of the past, it was the language of the future. And this is something that was starting to be the mindset of my generation and younger, that it was old people's language, not ours. And so trying to reinvent this. One other thing is at Sequoia High School, they had all these heroes up. And I remember seeing all these posters, and they didn't have 1 Native American hero on all these posters, because I went and looked at all these posters. And it really disturbed me that we didn't have heroes. So this is one of the reasons I made this animation. I taught over the years, all over the place. And one of the things that we would do, which was interesting, is we would make an animation as a complete product at the end. But I think a bigger part of the important part of storytelling is we would have the children go out to their families and the community and find stories and bring them back, and they would vote on what they would animate. And what it did is it gave them the ability to start the communications in their own families and their own worldview of out there, and teach everybody in the class the stories of their family. And so it was a bigger project than just the final animation that we completed in the language. And so throughout the years, I did this project. It was The Messenger with young 20-year-olds, and we made a computer animated stop motion animation. And this was about a 26-minute animation, which I thought would kill me. Those things fell around. But our story starts here, and the reason I wanted to show you a map of where we came from is that all of our stories actually, I naively got into this, not understanding that our stories often had a geolocation where they started. And as I learned more and worked with more communities, I started realizing where we were from and where these stories came from. And our language, which came from Sequoia, which is the original one, quickly turned into the newspaper. But one of the problems we had is even in the beginning animations, to do the syllabary, which this is the original newspaper that we had, the first Native American newspaper, we couldn't use it on the computers, which it came quickly to realize that we didn't have the access to easily put up titles, so we had to do in Photoshop. And so we needed to come up with solutions to be able to use our language in our stories faster, which brought me into, this is how our language quickly went from that to printing press, and this is what we had today. But if you notice the fonts, they're very thin in some parts, which is really bad for subtitling, for digital devices. And so it made it very difficult for that. But that was the part that our community was used to in this old printing press. And for 170 years, we used it. And even through our removal, I started doing films, and I was a producer of a film for the National Park Service, and I avoided this story my whole life. When you're from a community and they're all known by the removal, the Trail of Tears. I did not want to hear. It's like basically if someone's talking about the Holocaust your whole life, and that's the one thing that defines your community, and there's so much more than that. I avoided it until I realized how amazing the Cherokee people were at that time. And then it became much more interesting of a story and much more easy to work on. I had to deal with racism, as we all do in the world. They said that Woodrow, who is every aspect of genetically and all 4/4, was too white. I found out later they really wanted a Plains tribe looking person. And Cherokees do not look like Plains tribes people. And I had to deal with the idea that they wanted me to cast other tribal people that looked like Indians to the National Park Service. And I was able to win a lot of my people. But this is the removal, and this is where our communities came from. And I think that the reason I wanted to show you some of this stuff is that all of our stuff came from a faraway homeland, but our stories continued. And as we learned more about our heritage through these stories, and our communities were actually removed together. So all of my mother's people were neighbors and families of everybody around her in the community. So if you could imagine, your neighbors are either family or been your neighbors for thousands of years. And that's your neighbors, and that's your community. I know that, like, especially in academia, we all move from all over the place, but back home, people are connected for generations. And here's where Cherokee Nation is today. And this is your neighbor below with all these different territories. It's hard to find these on maps today, but as we got removed, one of the things that was important is education system. And Cherokees, highly educated people at the time, they were the most literate in North America, 80 to 90% literacy rate, being removed by this illiterate white population in the South, which was anywhere from 8 to 13% literacy rate from them, and in one language. But Cherokees love technology. In fact, one of the things that made my job easier is that even the Cherokees were the first west of the Mississippi to have a telephone. People don't think of that but some people came into Cherokee Nation, they talked on it back and forth, and they wondered if we'd buy it, we'd support this kind of infrastructure. They said, well, we can use our language, we'll use it. That's how they decided to use the phone. And this is another thing that happened in the 1970s, which made my job a little easier, is that even Steve Jobs in the 1970s was hiring Herman Zapp, which is a famous font designer, to design Cherokee font. It didn't make it into this computer until later, but as you can see, we started using this stuff, which was done in Photoshop, and we were able to move on to other things until we were still making stuff for our school systems in this old font. And if you can see that from in the back, you've got amazing eyesight. And I remember when I started doing this work and we started making everything onto the computer, and I told people that, you know, I used to teach art classes and graphic design, and if somebody turned that in today, I would probably fail them. And it didn't go over well in the community, but it was basically trying to show that you can't use this font for everything, and you definitely can't use it for subtitling on iPods. So we had our kids starting to write stories and do it in the language, and the problem was we couldn't do it with them on computers, which makes the whole digital storytelling much more complicated when you're stuck on pencils. And so we had to figure out what we're going to do to get on there. And we started doing songs and web chats with children. This is the Eastern Band. I'll skip over this, but there's nothing cuter than watching Cherokee children teach each other songs. But we'll skip over. This is the first day we got computers. Imagine, I watched these children grow up from when they were 3, and this was when they were second graders. And we were getting into the point where we weren't able to let them do more stories and writings all in the language. So we first approached Microsoft, and they didn't work with us at first. Then we met by chance Apple executive in Tulsa at a conference and told him what we wanted to do. And he got us the ability to talk to the heads of Apple. So when we did, we showed them our kids. And we told them, oh, by the way, this thing just came out, this iPhone. And when it came out, even in Cherokee Nation, it was huge. And these children stopped writing in Cherokee because now they can text and they can figure out English well enough to use these things. So we knew that we were screwed if we didn't get on this iPhone. So we started doing that. We also had to develop this. This took a little bit, putting our language on plastic so that we could teach the kids where the keys are because they couldn't see it. We didn't realize that that was also an issue. This is me back when I was younger. Goes so fast, people. So, and we did blogs. So they'd write stories, do their homework, and write in blogs. We would run servers in the language, and we had to work with the tech companies because they had different programming issues. At first, you couldn't do different passcodes and all of that to try to make this stuff work. We started working with elders to translate, and by the time we got released on the iPhone, Google called, Microsoft called, and one of our first translation programs was the Google search engine to do all the buttons and menus in Cherokee. So this is us translating this in my office here. And actually, I don't have many pictures of it, but my grandma made those stuffed animals of my first animation. I always loved that. I always keep it near my office. So, and we got into Unicode, which is, we were the first native group to be in Unicode, which is the system that decides what languages are in there and the codes that are out there. And I've been working with the Osage to get their language on there as an advisor to help them the process that we've done somewhat a few years earlier. And this is the font. Now, mind you, I made this for an iPod, those little bitty iPods with the screens. And even on the iPod, it was quite difficult. Luckily, those little 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old eyes were better than mine, but it made it necessary to figure out what are we going to do to write stories, do all this stuff, do subtitling in our language, because a lot of times we talk about the idea of doing all of this stuff, but not having to build the entire infrastructure underneath you to support this type of ability to tell stories. And as you can see, subtitling on something like this makes it quite difficult to see, especially when that screen is 3 by 3. So I also did paintings, and usually, what interesting thing about it is, usually my artwork was about 2 or 3 years earlier than the technology. And so this has those little globes for the little balls that we used to do web chatting with. And it was about 3 years before that. And my iPhone was also before the iPhone came out, because I had those little phones that had different sections. We didn't have iPhones, so most of my stuff early on was, oh, let me get that. Also, elders started to adapt the technology, what was interesting. This was a 85-year-old woman talking to somebody that she hadn't seen in years on iChat. And I watched this entire conversation in Cherokee of this beautiful woman who hadn't seen her friend in years. And by chance, I was at the school there one day, and her friend was over there, had a computer, and I said, oh, you want to talk to her? And they, all in Cherokee, they were having this long conversation, and this was early on, and I remember thinking how wonderful technology is, even here, for the ability for these people to communicate. And so, but we adopted any type of technology, every type of things that occurred from, I wanted to show this too, because I used to think I was special to work with Apple and Google and Microsoft. But Cherokees before me worked with IBM and all of this stuff to get this stuff going on there. They worked with font designers in the 70s. They worked with people in the 1800s. And so when I came around, you know, they don't teach people about ourselves that much. We know a few highlights with Sequoia and Boudinot with the newspaper. But there's been so much development with Will Rogers and the radio. And when you start learning your own history from yourself, you realize that maybe I designed, this is my first attempt for the keyboard for the iPhone. It didn't get in. We had to work 20 years, but I still love saving this one because it was the first attempt trying to figure out how do you put 86 characters in this small little space so that we can actually continue. Well, this is the keyboard that's on there today. It's on every iPhone in the world. And now these things have HD cameras where you can subtitle in Cherokee on them and make your own work and your own language with this. And so it's pretty exciting. This is the first day we had phones. And you can see the little girl's hand with purple Swalela. So we also worked with Facebook. Facebook was rather interesting because most people weren't on Facebook yet until our contested election. We had a contested election and everybody wanted to know who our boss is going to be because a lot of us work at Cherokee Nation. And so all these communities were out there signing up, trying to figure out who is going to be on there. And so everybody started getting Facebook accounts. And so we knew we had to actually translate that in Cherokee as well. We were on the first iPad that came out because of that. And we even gave raffles out to the children at speakers bureaus, which they were pretty excited about. And we were able to write books about our own people in our own language on these things. And the nice thing is, as different communities would write things differently, because we don't have an exact spelling for every word. Some communities spell it a little different. This allows us to have the community people from different places adjust a letter or two and not have to reprint an entire book. And that really saved us in classrooms because I used to have to make those books. And it made it so much easier. Our Cherokee Phoenix, we worked with them so that we have traditional stories on the site and we have regular stories. It's about camp, and we were able to do that in the language as well. But I would continue to make kids shows, teach numbers. I'd speak at universities where we'd have our kids do dances, and we had these 4 laptops in 4 directions, and they'd dance around them, and we would project them at the university, and people would have this experience where they were inside watching these children. And this was the result, and we were very thankful for Google for allowing this. An interesting story about this is this is a new button that wasn't originally there, but there was a glitch in the code. And we were working through all of this stuff, putting all these translations in. And in other places, when you use a fancy term, I suppose, is non-English orthography, which means different languages than English. Sometimes it would switch it to Cherokee across the world. And I thought this was awesome. We were going global. I know we shouldn't be so colonial, but it was very exciting that our language started to spread. And people started putting YouTube videos on how to turn it off because they couldn't figure it out. So within a week or so, Google put this button up. It's been there ever since. So if you ever get it turned on, don't worry. You can turn it on. Cherokee is easy to turn back into English if you need it. And fonts. We only had that one font, and these little girls would blow it up and try to color it and make different spacings, trying to make their stuff look beautiful. And this is one of the first fonts I made, and this is OCO, hello. And I wanted them to have something fun in font design. We didn't have fonts for our fun books and stories and our literature. So we started working with different font designers. I started learning how to make better fonts. Fonts for computers, fonts for printing, for books, handwriting fonts, because we had different styles of handwriting that had different types of curves and different types of shapes for different communities so that we wouldn't lose that. Different writing styles as things come together. We didn't want the elders writers that were really good but had distinctly different systems disappear. So we came up with a lot, and I worked on fonts for a long time. This one's kind of like Tron. If I thought, well, if we had Tron in Cherokee, I would have to do a font for it. So I made a font like that. I worked 7 days a week, and so sometimes I'd go home and paint some of these things that were happening. And the fonts that are under the little app symbols was a font called Gadoogie, which is on Microsoft operating system since Windows 8. And I showed this in an art show the day it was released so I wouldn't violate my non-disclosure agreement. And we would speak at Unicode, and we were allowed to learn about all these different conversations. One of the interesting ones was emoticons and the colors of emoticons and the racial tension that's happening and why you're able to do the thumbs up in different colors. I got to watch the whole conversation. It was really interesting because the world, having more people in there saying, no, this isn't right that one group gets to decide the color. And they're like, well, it's yellow, so it means everybody. And they're like, no, it doesn't. Like, we have to have different opportunities for anybody. And so being in the voice for that, we were able to watch all of these things and interact, and being on the committee at the time, I could actually talk to a lot more people about that. This is Gmail, which we didn't have even a term for that, so we could actually talk to each other. So we had to come up with a word for email. And this is Anagalese Goel, which is lightning paper, which I think it sounds pretty cool. So we worked with Windows 8. And when we did Windows 8, one of the problems you do find is this whole idea of colonialism is in everything, and it really is. If you don't think it is, talk to more people. Because we ended up having to translate all these different languages. And my fonts ended up in books and stuff, but we were dealing with the fact that we had to translate all the countries of the world. And what was a country and what wasn't. And we realized that we weren't even considered, like most people think North America only has 2 nations. That's not true. But that's how it is with Microsoft, and that's how it is with a lot of things. So we started getting all of these kind of books printed, but I wanted to do a map. So I started doing maps in Cherokee, and I started identifying small little nations, and it really was frustrating because all of these things didn't show any indigenous communities that were there longer than these colonial groups that showed up, but they weren't allowed to even be on a map. So then I got a little too ambitious and thought, oh, I'll make that. And I don't know about you, but I don't even know all of the names of every tribal nation in the United States, which is embarrassing. We should all be taught that. These are all the nations here, but we're not taught like that. I could do African countries, I could do European countries, but I didn't know all the ones, even in the communities. And as I taught in the communities over the years, I would collect the traditional names of the community. And as you can see, most of the communities I worked with were here because this is where the majority in this part of Oklahoma of Cherokee Nation speakers are today. And so this is where I usually worked in most of my schools, most of my language projects. Of course, I did the New Zealand and Cherokee. We spoke over there. And we were able to start getting fonts that would be easily read in smaller screens. So what they call the old sans serif fonts to make it a little bit easier. So Cherokee Nation bought this big giant planetarium. And you know, being all about education, Cherokees really love being educated in this kind of stuff. But they wanted something in Cherokee in the thing. And they said, oh, you can make something in that. And of course, because now I'd already done all of this other stuff, I said, sure. But I had no idea what I was doing. Like most of my projects, I had to figure it out. Whether I have to figure out Python, which we had to figure out Python codes to like do word sorting orders and frequent word list and all of that stuff. Well, I also had to figure out distortion rates for animations to do a 360 animation in a planetarium. And then also deal with sound, which is actually really tricky in this big bubble. But I did. And we would show it across Cherokee Nation, and it was in the Cherokee language. And we would be able to take these to different Cherokee communities. And I spent 7 weeks showing it in all these different communities across Cherokee Nation. But it also takes me to this issue as well. One of the things across Cherokee Nation, as you travel and you go across this place, our water is getting polluted. And I focused most of my life on stories and building up technologies to implement the stories that we could tell in our community. But now what we're going to do when 87% of our water is now impaired in Cherokee Nation, which means our pollution rate is really high. So I started doing animations about that. This is, oddly enough, Alaska Airlines paid me up last fall to show it to their passengers, which is great because Alaska Airlines goes to Alaska, which has a high amount of oil workers, and they had the opportunity to watch some of my work. I was at Google, and I was doing a conference at Google on a mapping issue, and Standing Rock was going on, and it was upsetting for all of our tribal communities because we have such environmental problems across these areas, and it affects all of us. When you screw over one tribe, it gives the government justification to screw over the next one because they say we have precedent that we can do this. So someone said, well, I don't have a lot of money, and I said, well, just use your talents. And they're like, oh, are you making an animation? And I was like, oh. So, okay, so I was at this conference, and I told myself I would make an animation at the conference in a week. And so I made this at night from my conference, stayed up late, and then on the way back I was making the music in the airport, sitting there wherever I could get a power outlet, making the music. But this goes back to the stories, and our stories really ground us. And so I started geolocating where our stories are from and doing research where they happened at, because our stories tell us where our medicines are grown, where our different events happen. So much of our truth of our stories. In fact, if you ever want to make me disappointed, just call it a myth. Because there's too much truth in these stories to call them myths anymore. And I sit on panels sometimes, and if you could say myths, it's rather aggravating. So I finished this one recently, and I try to tell some traditional stories. I try to tell new stories as well. The Cherokee Nation is working with me to do this next one on water issues in Cherokee Nation, and I wanted to make this look like paper come to life in ink drawing. And we're dealing with these issues to try to figure out how to make sure that we have a healthy enough environment to continue, which for the longest time I thought, well, now that I got all this done, now I can just tell stories. But now our environment's falling apart. It's just like a movie that just keeps a new chapter that you're going to have to deal with. And one of our chapters that we're dealing with today is being able to survive and continue our stories and have clean water to drink, which is rapidly disappearing. And so I would say that I would never thought of myself as an environmentalist on any level. And yet, a lot of my animation work now is turning to work on these issues, because if we don't have an environment, so many people are dying at home, and cancers and all this stuff happening where their life expectancy is shortening. And are shortening for our elders that are speakers, that are able to transmit the language and culture and our old knowledge, are dying earlier than we planned even. And we have an unhealthy ecosystem that's rapidly disappearing. And so with Cherokee Nation, we've devised a plan to put some ads out there, do animations. We have a TV show, OCO TV, which it's won 3 regional Emmys now, which I'm excited about, mainly because I got to work on all 3. But I was really excited to be a little bit of a part on some of those really talented directors and producers at OCO that do that work. And one of the things that they're very conscious of too is the environment for our communities, for our families at home, because we don't want these people in our communities, our elders and our cousins, our great uncles and all that stuff to die early, because we need them around as long as possible so the next generation can take these stories that were passed to them. And so this is one of the things that I'm working on as well. And then also, this is part of the animation. This is the thing that you find on Google Maps. And I know I'm getting close on time. If you notice all the different indigenous nations on here, right? Yeah, we didn't either. And when I was at Google, I asked this question. And I said, you know, I could open up a pizza place next door tomorrow, and I could get it on there the same day. And at the time I said, my tribal nation has uncontested boundaries with the US government, and it's not on the map. Why? And Geo Good for Good is a great conference that Google puts out. It's basically a conference for people around the world, 100 people. And there's only a few people from the United States that come. And it's basically indigenous people, often professors, and people that work with indigenous people on these issues, from rainforest, water issues, climate change, all of that, come to Google. And so this woman who's a vice president looks out around these brown faces. Why aren't our nations on here? So I've been working 3 years now to get that on there, and we've got data to them for the United States this week. Canada got it there about a month ago. Canadians didn't have, we had to have a US government agency verify our data. And Canada didn't have the same kind of restriction. So they got on a little quicker, and they have some really great geography people that worked on that work, that have been working with them for a long, and they're This is what they do. I'm an artist. I tell stories. I animate. So I had to work with GIS at Cherokee Nation, one of the oldest GIS groups of a tribal nation in the United States. And we're close to getting that on there so that someday when you open up Google Maps, you'll start to see this. And this is where stories begin. When we can get recognition as nationhood for the entire world to understand we are people, we need protection of our water. We need protection of our stories, our culture, because we all value this kind of thing. It's wonderful. I'm not Comanche, but I think the world's a better place if there's Comanche speakers, a Comanche nation in it, than if there's not. And if we can get that out in every aspect of society, and when you go to your iPhone and you turn on a language, you'll scroll by Cherokee, and you'll know that there is a people. You'll see Hawaiian. Someday you'll see Osage, and you'll see that these people exist, and they have wonderful stories, and this allows us this ability to continue on and tell our stories. So I know we don't have a lot of time, and I covered so much. So, but I'll take some questions here. Yeah. You want to see a story? Yeah. Do we have? Yeah. Let's see one of the kids' stories. I really am proud of some of their work. I didn't know if we'd have time, but let's see this one. This is a really cute one. This was made in the janitor's closet with toilet paper all around them and books. And I found this one kind of fun. Actually, I don't know if. Let's see. Let's see. On that slide, you can see it's you can see I have to wait to me. So you have to have a planetarium plan?
With we have the like virtual reality headsets and stuff coming out, and I wasn't sure if it would be compatible.
It's not, one of the things that I want to do is, I've been looking into doing more storytelling in VR, and what I find really intriguing is that when I have like this winged serpent, it's called a mutant, it would swallow the whole crowd, those kids would freak out. And it was so exciting to make stories in there. There's some disadvantages to 360 storytelling. You don't get to use all the back and forth camera stuff that keeps, as you get used to it as a filmmaker, you can go back and forth to the different shots. And in 360 world, we're there, like the play in every aspect. One of the problems I had in doing that is I was doing storyboards and it was squares. And I was struggling to put this thing together because I was used to like regular film. And so now, after doing some of these 360 animations, it makes telling stories. I'm working on cross-departmental things with doing motion capture animations with media and engineering to do live performances in VR. And I understand a lot better now how to actually orchestrate a shot in 360 than I did before I did it. And I was so used to like regular film. And so, I'm working on a piece right now that I'm trying to make about.
We got one. Or here's some of your others.
Your website.
Test
to get him to record it. We kept missing each other for several days. And I was like, I only got like the eclipse is a deadline. I got to get this thing done. And I only had this little laptop, which I had so much problems with, which I don't use anymore. But it was kept filling up. I'd start rendering, and
You also did these letting children.
this one I did. But yeah, a lot of times I have kids do them.
With claymation, basically.
Yeah, I've done a few where I've taught some computer animation, but since the last few years, if you're a student, you can use Maya for free for 4 years if you're a college student, which is new. Before it was like $3,000 a license, and education licenses are still kind of high. And so the ability to use the technology now is actually getting a lot easier. And we didn't used to have this kind of capability. I mean, there's still disadvantages in the community, but we certainly have a lot more tools, and we can use our language a lot more easily. And there's now precedent for it. So, you know, a lot of times, even when we were doing computer systems, people go, well, if we put our language on there, aren't they going to steal our medicine? And this was a real concern, because you're like, this is all we got left. Can they take, what else are they going to take? Like, and so the idea of how comfortable they are was a transitional period for all of our communities. Like even just designing fonts was a traditional time where we started showing like fonts, and I had an elder in the back go, I don't want you ruining our language. And then we were like, well, we brought some food. Let's eat. And it really stopped us for like 6 months from actually continuing that conversation until we could get more information out, and not publicly, because if I would have said, no, you don't understand, it would be like I was arguing with an elder, and then good luck being right. It wouldn't even matter if you have the best idea in the world. You've, you know, embarrassed yourself in front of people. So we had to really pay attention. And that's why community-based work is often the most important process, is that you have a great idea, you go in there, and then you see if that great idea is even reasonable to people. And then you wait and let it sink in and see if people want to do it. Because I'd go, like I did have a community, but I also go to all these other places. And Cherokee Nation's a big place, so if they don't know your grandparents, you're new. They don't know you. There's no relationship. And so you have to build a lot of credibility over time to work with one community to the next. And so I spent years working in lots of communities, biding my time until like I get a lot bigger pass today than I used to, but I also I spent a lot of times building up relationships where, you know, if someone says, I don't want that, then I took that as a very serious concern that maybe this isn't every concern does matter in the community, because you don't want to be dismissive. Even if you really think you're right, you sometimes don't do things.
Can you tell us a story you got a child?
I could, but
This is really great. I want to make sure we don't get too far behind.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Joseph.
Appreciate it.